And good evening. Colleen, have we gone live at this point?
Yes, ma'am. We are.
Great. Welcome to all of the participants who are joining us this evening. And just to make sure it's the right webinar, we've had a lot of them these days. This webinar is on chronic school absenteeism in Oklahoma's public schools. So as we are waiting for people to gather, because I know things can happen, we're going to invite you to pop your name and where you're from into a chat box, so that we can understand where in the state you are speaking to us from. It's always interesting to understand how wide our scope is. The other thing I will mention to you this evening is that we have our panelists that are a wealth of knowledge for us this evening, and I think you're going to learn a lot. So I'm very excited myself to hear about it. But you may have questions that you come to this with. So go ahead and put your question in the chat box, and during the course of the evening it may be answered. But if it's not, we do have a Q&A planned at the end of the evening, and we will bring those questions back to the group at the end of the evening. So I'm going to thank you right now for your participation in this evening, and look forward to learning right along with you. So we'll give it a couple of more minutes for people to settle in, find their glass of water, tell the kids to go in the other room, pet the dog, whatever needs to happen in your evening. And then we'll be ready to get started.
So we are getting a number of messages from participants that the chat box has been disabled, which means I think people may not be able to, for example, introduce themselves and say where they're from. So I don't know if, okay.
Looks like we're working on it.
Caressa says she's working on it. So just to all of you out there, hopefully we can get that fixed. It does seem like Q&A is working though.
Okay, good. So we'll give it another minute here to see if our specialists in the background can iron out the kinks. And do we think, Colleen, we're ready to go at this point?
Yep, let's go.
All right, away we go. I'm going to say welcome again to everyone, because maybe there were some who weren't present when I said that initially. And we want to thank you for attending this evening's webinar on chronic school absenteeism in Oklahoma public schools. And we only wish that we didn't have the need to have this particular webinar, but here we are. So this webinar is being put on by Advanced Oklahoma Kids. It's also known as AOK, and it's a statewide education coalition of organizations, parents, kids, and educational leaders who want to work together to improve the quality of education for Oklahoma kids. And this coalition was launched in September of 2023 and has hit the ground running ever since. AOK works on advocating for policy changes that are rooted in what is best for our Oklahoma students. Webinars like this help us gauge community concern and see what is happening in our schools. My name is Debbie Whitfield, and the reason I have been willing to participate in this webinar and with this particular group is because I am a career educator. Now, I am retired at this point, but I did the majority of my public school work in Enid, Oklahoma. And I was a teacher and a principal there. And most of the schools that I was a principal of were high poverty schools. So it gave me a very real look into the effects of absenteeism and the causes, because the causes are complex and there is not one answer, and it's different at every grade level and every age. So I too am as excited to be here and to hear from our group of panelists this evening. Our goal for the evening is to hear from these leaders in our state about the challenges they faced, the data that they have looked at, and the innovative approaches they have used to help us solve this problem of chronic absenteeism. The absenteeism is an issue that affects our educational outcomes in Oklahoma. And because it affects those outcomes, it affects each and every one of us. Now, there are many reasons, as I've stated, that children may not come to school, and we're going to learn some of those reasons and much more from our experts tonight. So as we move through this, just understand that is our focus. We've got to break that school to prison pipeline, and each of these panelists is uniquely positioned to help us understand how that can be accomplished. So tonight, I'm going to first of all introduce our 5 panelists to you, and then I'm going to give them an opportunity to say a few things about why they chose to participate in this evening and what some of the issues are that are on their heart. After that, in terms of our agenda, we will move to a few questions that we have thought were important to have answered. And then finally, we will move to our Q&A. So my job is to kind of be timekeeper and keep us moving along, and to assist you when you want to ask a question. So tonight we have these 5 panelists with us: Dr. David Blatt, Dr. Ebony Johnson, Officer Benjamin Hill, Aubrey Flowers, and Kyle Hoff. The first one I would like to introduce to you this evening is Dr. Blatt, and he is the Director of Research and Strategic Impact at Oklahoma Appleseed Center for Law and Justice. David Blatt joined Oklahoma Appleseed in August 2023 as Director of Research and Strategic Impact. For 10 years, he led Oklahoma Policy Institute, shepherding the organization's growth into one of the largest and most respected policy organizations in Oklahoma. Many of you may have heard his name in other places. If you did, you were fortunate. Prior to that, he served as Policy Director for Community Action Project of Tulsa and as Physical Analyst for the Oklahoma State Senate. After leaving Oklahoma Policy in 2019, he was a lecturer for 3.5 years in the Masters of Public Administration program at the University of Oklahoma, Tulsa. A native of Montreal and Edmonton, Canada, David completed a BA at the University of Alberta and a master's from McGill University before moving to the US to earn a PhD from Cornell University. I give you Dr. David Blatt.
All right, thank you, Debbie, for that very kind introduction. And I think I do have to mention that as a native of Edmonton, Alberta, I am passing up Game 5 of the Stanley Cup Finals tonight, but I may be getting texts and messages on the side. So if suddenly I burst into applause or tears, you will know why. So I think I'm not going to take up much time in the beginning. We were asked just to indicate what led to our involvement on this issue, and I've been spending a good part of the last few months doing research and collecting data specifically around the issue of truancy, which is a subset of the issues around chronic absenteeism, but is a situation that kicks in when students have reached a given number of unexcused absences, and being truant can lead to a series of consequences for students and their families. And I have spent while doing this research, I've had the opportunity to speak with both school personnel and folks from the justice system in various capacities. I've actually had interviews with Kyle Hoff, with Dr. Johnson, with Aubrey Flowers, all of whom are working on this, and very much admired the perspectives they brought to this issue. So I'm very excited to be part of the conversation with them. I've spoken to district attorneys and city prosecutors, folks at the school district level, whether it's superintendents, principals, folks who work with family engagement counselors. And I guess, you know, sort of my biggest takeaway that I'll expand upon is that this is a complex and multifaceted phenomenon, both chronic absenteeism and truancy, that is treated in many, many different ways in different communities, and look forward to being part of the conversation.
Thank you, David. Appreciate that very much. Okay, and so our next panelist that I would like to introduce you to is Officer Benjamin Hill. So Officer Benjamin Hill is a security resource officer at Glenpool Public Schools. They call him an SRO, I believe. So Officer Benjamin Hill is a school resource officer. He is a Glenpool police officer assigned to the Glenpool School District. A school resource officer is a carefully selected, specifically trained, and adequately equipped law enforcement officer with sworn authority. They are trained in school-based law enforcement and crisis response, and are assigned by employing law enforcement agency to work collaboratively with one or more schools using community-oriented policing concepts. Officer Hill has been sworn into law enforcement since 2017 and has been an SRO since 2022. Before that, he worked in corrections starting in 2006. And as I introduced him, I have to say, I had no idea so much education went on to prepare these officers to be in this setting. And I'm very grateful for that training and for our response from our police officers to assist us in our schools. So with that, I turn it to Officer Hill. Thank you so much for being with us.
Oh, absolutely. I'm delighted to be here today. I will say, of course, I've been in law enforcement for a minute. I've got a family, I've got children that are in the school system, and I'll speak about that later. I notice this issue on a day-to-day basis. Working with the schools has truly been a rewarding experience. And hopefully later on, I'd love to give a different view, a different point of view, an SRO's point of view as it pertains to the school to prison pipeline and what I've observed during my time, both working in corrections and now as an SRO.
Thank you so much. So for our next guest, maybe you've seen her on the news this year. It's Dr. Ebony Johnson, Superintendent of Tulsa Public Schools. We thank you so much for taking your time to be with us this evening. She is the Superintendent of Tulsa Public Schools, the largest school district in the state of Oklahoma, serving nearly 34,000 students at 77 schools. She is a proud graduate of Tulsa Public Schools and attended Walt Whitman Elementary, Gilcrease Middle School, and McLean High School. Dr. Johnson is a lifelong educator and transformational leader who started her career at Tulsa Public Schools as a classroom teacher at Monroe Middle School in 1999. Among many of the awards and accolades she has received, in 2020, Dr. Johnson was named the Tulsa Public Schools Chief Academic Officer, providing strategic oversight for special education, multilingual learning, services to immigrant and refugee learners and families, curriculum and instruction, early childhood education, and student and family support services, including mental, social, and emotional health. Now that is a big plate full of responsibilities. And so we thank you so much for your willingness to be with us and share your expertise this evening, Dr. Johnson. Please.
Thank you so much, Ms. Whitfield, and hello to all the panelists and to all those who are on this Zoom and this webinar. I say hello on behalf of Tulsa Public Schools. I feel that this work is both personal and professional. I'm a lifelong Tulsan, and my mom made sure that no matter what, my sisters and I attended school on a daily basis. I know that it's critically important that as we are seeking to move our students into both proficiency and beyond, we have to have students in seats. They have to come to school every day. We are struggling in our state as a whole with chronic absenteeism, but only at about 20%. And in Tulsa Public Schools, we have a higher rate. Our rate is double that for chronic absenteeism. And so it's an issue that we had before the pandemic, and it's exacerbated since then. We're committed to providing supports for our families, committed to providing supports for our school teams so that we can ensure that our students are at school learning and being productive.
Thank you so much. It's a big job, and we thank you for taking it on. So our next panelist is Aubrey Flowers. And Aubrey comes to us from the head of Cradle to Career Initiatives at Impact Tulsa. Aubrey serves as Impact Tulsa's head of Cradle to Career Initiatives. She is a passionate advocate seeking to facilitate meaningful change for the children, families, and communities of Tulsa. In service to all children and adults, Aubrey is also proud to be an innovator, reimagining the possibilities for public education, public policy, and public engagement. Aubrey's professional career has included 10 years as a classroom teacher and instructional mentor. Most recently, Aubrey served as a school leader at Tulsa Public Schools for more than 7 years. As a building principal, Aubrey led her school to decrease chronic absenteeism by nearly 10%. Increase reading proficiencies to a proud 73%, while also increasing and diversifying the student and teacher population. So this evening, we are grateful to welcome Aubrey Flowers to our panel. Aubrey?
Hello there, and good evening. Yes, I am incredibly proud to join this panel and to bring just one more voice to this really important work. Yes, as you said, I come to this work as our current head of Cradle to Career Initiatives for Impact Tulsa, but I'm very freshly off the school leader role where I was a principal and know firsthand the challenges that both our schools and families are having pre-pandemic and then post-pandemic. And I couldn't be more passionate about the work that we're doing to not only work with families and school districts to help solve this really challenging problem, but also to bring it to our community, because it is a community effort that's going to move this. We need to know that businesses are affected by families being able to get their children to school. We know that there is really great work to be done, and I'm really excited to get everyone on board. So thank you again. Good to see you all.
When we introduced her, there was the innovative part in there, and there must have been a lot of innovation going on to decrease the amount you did. So we'll be anxious to hear about those pieces and to get the reading scores up at the same time.
We'll get into that later.
Okay. The principal and me couldn't resist. So our last panelist that I'd like to introduce this evening is Kyle Hoff. And Kyle comes to us from the Truancy Court Program Coordinator for the Chickasaw Nation. Kyle Hoff is the truancy coordinator, as I said, and he oversees the truancy court program, which aims to decrease juvenile delinquency risk factors by providing advocacy efforts to first American parents. Kyle graduated from the University of Oklahoma and began his career working for the Oklahoma Department of Corrections as a probation officer before transitioning into employment with the Chickasaw Nation in the same capacity. Kyle moved within the same department to the truancy court program coordinator position in August of 2023, with ambitions to positively affect students, today's youth. Kyle believes that as a public servant, having a special focus on education is crucial in protecting and improving the overall quality of life of the Chickasaw people, other First Americans alike, and Oklahomans as a whole. Those are wonderful goals, and we are so appreciative of your willingness to participate with us, Kyle. So to Kyle, I give this floor.
Sure. Thank you, Debbie. I want to say thank you to David and everybody that works for the Appleseed Foundation for having me on. I know that I'm able to give a unique perspective from the legal side of things. The Chickasaw Nation has recently passed legislation within the last year that allows us to kind of introduce this truancy program. This program that we've built from the ground up is focused on preventative efforts. We want to offer advocacy to families in the schools to kind of give an individualized approach to each family, and we want to avoid court action. And so we're able to have 5 staff members now working hands-on with families to really avoid court involvement in these truancy cases and figure out the root cause of their absenteeism. And this first year that we've had the program has been very successful. We're building greatly right now, and we're very hopeful for the future. And I'm glad to be a part of this to hear different perspectives on how everybody else in the state is handling this issue.
Great, thank you so much, Kyle. So I would invite you all to get your pens ready so you can start taking your notes. And if there are school leaders out there, you may be getting some thoughts as to what your back to school conversation is going to be come August. So with that, we're going to move into our questions. And I will tell you, we have given, in terms of a time frame, about 10 minutes for each of 5 questions. And we have specifically asked for responses from certain people on different questions. But if it's a burning point for you panelists, I want you to jump in. So just jump in there and go ahead and give us your thoughts. So our first question as we move through our time here is, how can schools better engage with parents and the community to address absenteeism? And I just want to say one thing about that question. How can schools better engage? I think of schools as a service organization, and it's like walking into any store. We have the responsibility to invite people in and to work with them. So how do we set that stage to engage with parents and the community and help them see that we want to deal with this chronic absenteeism? So I will just start by asking one of the panelists that we've identified here. If David, would you like to go first here and give us your thoughts on that question?
Sorry, did you call on me?
Yes, David.
I think this was actually, I think this was one of the questions for the other panelists.
Oh, well, I might have been, but we're going to hear what you have to say real quick, and then we'll move along.
Okay. So I think I probably have less to offer than some of my colleagues here as to how to better engage with parents in the community. I'm actually going to turn this. I'm going to let Aubrey and Officer Hill and Dr. Johnson weigh in, because I think they're working on this one, and Kyle on a daily basis. I think this is more in their in their expertise. So.
Thank you, David. All right, then let's go to Officer Hill.
So first of all, I want to go back after hearing Dr. Johnson and everyone that followed her. I forgot to thank all of you guys. And just to let you know how great it is to be on a panel with everyone. I'm definitely going to give a view from a parent's perspective when it comes to this, because I have children who are in the school system. And as Dr. Johnson referenced earlier, we are seeing something differently post-COVID than we saw pre-COVID in that way. So I will say this honestly and transparently, my kids want to be chronically absent as well. Okay. That is just the nature of kids when it comes to the school system these days, but I don't allow them to be. I'm their parent. But I will give you some insight from being at the door. I'm the SRO, so when a student is truant, or if their parents are failing them to compel to come to school, I'm the guy they call. I go to the house, I figure out what's going on and why. And I will just give you an observation that the child's presence has to matter before they become chronically absent. They have to matter. When I show up to the house and start asking questions about why they haven't been at school, the common answer is, oh, I don't know. They don't really give you a roundabout. It's not until you begin to say things such as Coach so-and-so is missing you, or Miss so-and-so is missing you, Mr. so-and-so misses you, that they feel like they've actually been seen and noticed. Because kids know, we have to give them credit for this. They know when their presence matters, and they know why their presence matters. And if we're disingenuous, they're going to see right through it. If they begin to think that we only care because it affects our numbers or stats or funding or anything like that, they're going to see our efforts as selfish. Do you only want me there because you don't want the stat, or because someone else is telling you that I'm not there, because I just have to be there? They're going to know that, and they're not going to buy into the reason why we say that their presence matters, or the lack of their presence matters. So just to say, before, they have to feel like they are seen beforehand, before this becomes a problem. And that's something I've seen at the door whenever I do my truancy visits.
Thank you, Benjamin. I thought that was that piece about seen and noticed, something I wrote down. Thank you for that very strong point. And so, Kyle, what would you offer us on this topic?
Sure. In the brief time that we've been able to kind of have a startup on our program, I think having a hands-on approach with these families is really key. Every family is going to be different. Everybody has different situations that they deal with that may prevent them from getting into school. Kid may be staying up too late. Somebody may be getting bullied at school. There's thousands of different scenarios that we have gone through with families that may lead them to not be motivated for school. And so we've found success inviting school staff to these advocacy meetings that we have at the schools to truly meet with the families and understand some of the root causes that is leading to their absenteeism. Generally, we've had great success. And so we've met with over 150 families this first school year. Obviously, we're hoping to grow that. Only one of the families that we've met with in person has gone on to our court program. So we've been far and away successful if we're able to get that family in a seat and talk to them with school staff to really boil down to the root cause of what the issue is, and provide local tribal resources to that family in order to get them on the right track.
Kyle, thank you so much. I was thinking about what you just said there about root causes, and identifying that root cause would be on my agenda for back to school, and because I heard that success that you had with that strategy. So thank you so much. And now, Dr. Johnson, how would you add on to these conversations?
Yes, so many great things already said by Ben and Kyle. I'm taking notes over here. I appreciate what you've shared. I would just add that there's several things that we've made a decision as a district that we must prioritize as it relates to engaging our families. One, we must be authentic with them. Make sure that they know that, you know, their child matters to us, and when they're not present, it affects us when they're not there, and it affects their child's academic experience. And so just being very sincere where we know our families can really know that we mean what we're saying. In addition, you know, there needs to be strong instructional classroom experiences so that our students can be excited about coming every day. Making sure that when they're there, they're going to get a quality learning experience where they don't want to miss. And so they're nudging their parents. If they're in elementary, they are making sure they're on the bus stop as middle schoolers, and in some cases with the high schoolers, they're driving themselves and or making sure that they get there so that they won't miss what's happening. Also, just making sure we clarify attendance rules. I mean, there's so much misinformation out there. Families misunderstand exactly what it means to miss either a full day, half day. Just making sure that all of those things are understood so that they know what it means to be a chronically absent student, and the parents understand that. I'll also say, you know, just making sure we have a full understanding of the barriers that our families are experiencing. And as much as we are able to help those barriers, we can do that. And so just hearing from families, getting that information from them so that we can contribute to removing those barriers. Collaborating with community partners and agencies. I am so glad to see Ms. Flowers on this call because she and I have not only worked together in Tulsa Public Schools, but in her work in Impact Tulsa. And so just that level of collaboration with the entire community is really important. And then just the last couple of things, just organizing teams to at the district level to focus on chronic absenteeism. And so just excited to have a team that we are standing up this year. It's the first of its kind that's actually focused on, you know, truly looking at data on a consistent basis, making sure that we are going out to the homes and talking to the families, ensuring that we have resources available and those things. So, you know, of course, just excited to have our team who's doing that work. I'll talk a little bit more about the team and the other questions. And then lastly, for the parents, just making sure that they're prioritizing their child coming to school every day and making sure that that's something that they take very serious.
If I could add just one thing to what Ebony just said, I think what is often overlooked when we talk about chronic absenteeism, it obviously affects a student's ability to learn and make progress. But she mentioned how it affects the whole school. And you know, what I've heard consistently from folks is how when you have a large number of students who are not in attendance each day, it just makes it so much more challenging for the teachers to have to continually having to go back and make up from lost ground and get students caught up. And I don't know exactly where the tipping point is, but I think if you're, you know, missing more than a handful of students every day, then it's just becomes, you know, a vicious cycle that's hard to pull yourself out of.
Thank you, David. I appreciate that addition to all that Dr. Johnson said. And Dr. Johnson, I'll just tell you, I couldn't write fast enough to keep up with all of the things that you gave us. The biggest thing that I would just like to reflect upon, as I heard from all three of you, is that at all of our encounters with various stakeholders, be that parents, people in the community, the students themselves, have to be authentic. They have to really know that you care and that it matters that they're there and who it matters to. When you talked about naming different people that miss them and why they're not there. So getting to the heart of why we want kids there. So I thank you, and thank all the panelists for those very thoughtful remarks that you gave us. So we will move along to our second question here, and it is the data question. And any person knows that data drives instruction, data drives decision making, and good decisions rely on good data. So our question in this area is, what are you seeing in the data for kids that are chronically absent? So can I start with you this time, David? I'm so sorry. Threw you a curveball the last time.
Okay. You know, there's been a lot of research that's come out, and I think Aubrey's been very much on the ground working with the data, her and her colleagues at Impact Tulsa. I think some of the things we're seeing is that, you know, as much as you can say that there's a 20% chronic absenteeism rate for the state of Oklahoma and 40% for Tulsa, it tends to cluster among certain populations more than others. So certainly low-income schools have higher rates. We'll see it higher among certain demographic groups, African-American students, students with disabilities are absent more often. One group that actually has lower chronic absenteeism rates are English language learners, and that may be a reflection of the importance that immigrant families will place on their children being in school and getting an education as a way forward. So, you know, it's certainly not affecting all sectors of the community equally or all parts of the state. But I think wherever you see populations that deal with all the other challenges and barriers, you're going to see chronic absenteeism rates being higher.
Thank you, David. So Aubrey, how would you add on to that from what you're seeing in your work there at Impact Tulsa?
Yeah. So I think what's really important here is to understand that chronic absenteeism is a really complicated issue. And it's a complicated issue that was made even more complicated by the pandemic. So these things that these barriers, these challenges that our schools have had, that our families have had, existed prior to the pandemic, but going through the pandemic just turned us upside down, right? So when I think about the data and what the data tells us, it tells us that there are barriers that are keeping kiddos out of school. Things like for some of our high school students, that during the pandemic, they might have been able to get a job during the day, right? And help to provide an income to their family because they had shifted to an online or distance learning model. And so they technically could figure out how to balance both those things. And now we're back to brick and mortar, but the ask of some of those students and those families is to now move or shift or not need that income because they need to get back into a brick and mortar school, right? So it was already there. You already had many children who were helping to support their families, but now it got even more complicated, right? When I think about the concept around not wanting to go to school, social anxiety or school refusal is a real challenge, especially for many of our younger students. That existed prior, but now really is often to a debilitating standpoint for some of our children. When I think about, so this is probably not going to win anyone over, but I have to say, because so during the pandemic, we shifted everyone to a distance learning or an online model because we had to. And in order to keep our families and our students engaged, this was what we had to do. And we did it. And then coming back out of it, we're now fighting the argument of relevancy. Do I have to be in the building? Because I didn't have to be in the building a few years ago, right? But what our families and our children aren't really thinking about are all the other things that they are gaining from an in-person, in-school experience. And so it's upon us to make it relevant for them, to make it that sense of belonging is critical. I can't speak to it enough. I would even push us beyond more than just knowing that they've been missed, but helping them to have this fear of missing out, right? They don't want to miss a science experiment. They don't want to miss a conversation. They don't want to miss a guest speaker or read aloud, those kinds of things. So how do we help our students and our families to re-engage that way? The other thing is misinformation is huge. So even as a principal, I would stand on a soapbox and help to explain what absenteeism is and what it isn't. And things like sharing with our families that excused absences are still absences, right? Yes, I know baby has strep throat. I have children. I know that game, but it still is not time at school. And even though they could get the assignments in a different way, they are still absent, and it still contributes to their learning and understanding. And so that's kind of the data that's coming out from a national standpoint. We have been working in Impact Tulsa alongside TPS to really help to understand we call them the big four, but they're the barriers that are, and I'm jumping ahead, so I won't go too far into it, but they're the root cause. They're the things that we have identified as root cause to chronic absenteeism. And those are safety, transportation, mental and physical health, as well as housing instability. Those are the big four barriers that our families and students are struggling with here in the Tulsa area. And that's really where we are digging in to do lots of work so that we are coming at this from a wraparound standpoint.
Thank you, Aubrey. As you articulated those various areas, again, my principal brain was going, okay, I got to write those down so I could go back and construct how I'm going to help my staff focus on these various areas. And that excitement about school, about how do we get kids excited and not wanting to miss the social studies lesson where we're doing traveling west and learning about westward exploration. 5th grade, loved it. So thank you for highlighting those things that we need to focus on in a very comprehensive way. Appreciate that. Let's move on to our next question in terms of, we've kind of hit on it, but let's just kind of zero in on some specifics here. The root causes for chronic absenteeism. What are some of those primary causes of chronic absenteeism in our public schools? And I'll open this up to any panelists who would like to speak to this. And if you might just mention 2 or 3 that you run into, and we'll go around and each one can contribute some thoughts here. And then by the time we get done, if you still have some burning ones, we'll just circle back and see who else wants to add on. So let's see. Officer Hill, you look like you had a thought there in terms of a primary cause for that chronic absenteeism.
You know, I'm probably going to touch on this later on, but definitely what Aubrey said, definitely what I just say we listen to Kyle. I was thinking that earlier because a lot of the things I've been preparing for this speech, I'm like, Kyle's already doing it. Things that Dr. Johnson said about the different communities, what Aubrey just said about, and the only thing that comes to mind is, like, without getting too much in the weeds, we really probably need to pay more attention to those communities who live at the edge of desperation, those who are in less fortunate situations, because it's not. I'm trying to think of the houses I show up to. They all kind of have the same common denominator around them, and definitely I'll let somebody else dive deeper into that. That's just an observation that I've made, because there are houses I'm not showing up to, and communities and neighborhoods I'm not showing up to, but then there are the ones that I am, and definitely that should be looked at as a root cause.
I thought that was an interesting phrase, if I could jump in there, the desperation piece comment that you made. Would you expand on that just a little bit for our audience, please, Officer Hill?
Absolutely. When I say edge of desperation, those whose parents, there are students, there are parents who are probably forced into situations, they have kids, life hasn't really been fair to them, and they still have children to care for and all those things. So a lot of things that matter to my family and to some of the other families, to them, they're just lucky to get through to the next day. They're just lucky to have a meal. There are homes I've showed up to that let's take a single mom, for instance, just trying her best, going through school. Her kid is chronically late. Why? Because of all the list of priorities, as long as their kid is there, in her mind, being tardy is just very low on the priority. There are other families who, I think David was saying earlier about immigrant families, non-English speaking ones. Well, they have different dynamics. Here in Glenpool, we have a large Zomi population, or Burmese population. We also have Hispanic population here. And the children being involved in the family income is a big thing. And so when it comes to them going to school or them helping the family, they usually opt to help the family. And that's just a reality that my kids just don't know about, and other students just don't know about. But when we approach it from the lenses of holding those kids up to the same measure as the other ones, we see it as this huge problem, but to them, it's just life.
So I want to jump in here, if that's okay, Debbie. Is that all right?
Go for it.
So, when I think about the work we're doing around the Big Four, I also think about things like things that are community level struggles and challenges, right? Beyond what I think Officer Hill is talking about, those do hold true. But I also think about something like loose dogs, right? When you have families that are living walkable to their schools, but families do not feel safe to have their child walk to the building because of the I don't know what the right word would be, epidemic of loose dogs that are not safe for their children, right? That goes beyond me as a parent. But it goes towards our community. And what can we do? How can we wrap around and there isn't any one solution there, right? That's what makes chronic absenteeism such a challenge, is because it's not any one thing. It's we can't work with just I don't know, the official office of animal control, and say scoop up all these dogs. These might be residential and family dogs as well, but that in and of itself is one piece of a really complicated problem, right? So I think about safety. I think about single car families who have one way to move their family around. And when that car is either being used by someone in the family who's off to work, or who it breaks down, these are all challenges that our families are experiencing. And one of the outcomes that we are seeing at school level is that students are either late or not attending school.
Aubrey, all of those comments to me direct us right back to the complexity of the issue. The dogs running down the street. And if you're worried that your child's going to be attacked every day, and how do we as a school respond to that? That's a big challenge. And so it does take us to that larger thought of how does the community get alongside schools and understanding how they can participate in breaking that some of these areas that keep kids from being in school.
Yeah, I mean, even if you think about it, we have employers who, and don't get me wrong, I don't want to say that you shouldn't be hiring students. We have many students who are working, but we have employers who are employing our students during school hours. Could we help to support those employers to maybe think about employing students after school hours so that they are partners with us and employing these children who absolutely need and depend on that income, but to do it in a way that is also prioritizing school.
Great point. Great point. Okay, others who would like to respond to the question of some of our primary causes?
There's been so many great things. Oh, no, go ahead, Kyle. I want to hear from you. And then I'll jump in after you.
Okay, sorry, I didn't know when to jump in. I feel like I can bring a different perspective from most on the panel. For those not familiar, the Jigsaw Nation is in the south central area of Oklahoma. We cover 13 counties. And within those 13 counties, there's 70 school districts that we are able to receive referrals from. Many of those districts are rural communities. Obviously in rural Oklahoma, socioeconomic status will play into, some of those root causes for absenteeism. And so one of the main issues that we have had are students that have transferred schools and have issues with transportation, having an open transfer policy and parents wanting to have their students enrolled in a certain school district that they're not in the bus routes for. We've had to work with these families and really figure out ways that they can solve that problem. There's communities that they may live 20 minutes away from the high school, and like Officer Hill said, they may have a single mom that worked until 2 a.m. that night and isn't going to be awake. They're going to rely on that high school kid to get the younger kid into school. And so some of these rural communities, transportation is a crucial issue. And we've worked with some of our local schools and changing some bus routes and maybe thinking about times that we can, pick up kids together. There's been collaboration there. And I think that's one of the pivotal issues in kind of the rural areas with some of the lower income families that are not able to drive their kids to school every single day.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Kyle.
I was just going to add that so many things have been said. I just want to just bring in the lens of, as we're thinking about, the barriers, John Hopkins and Attendance Works reminds us, and it's a lot of the 4 reasons that Aubrey stated. We've got the barriers, we have aversion, students not wanting to go to school for various reasons, disengagement and just misconceptions. And we've said some of those things. I just kind of want to zero in on one of the reasons that we're finding in the research around students not wanting to attend school. We've got several things going on. We have students that are helping family members in a way that positions them to, and the older students, be adults in the home before they're adults. And they're helping family members who are struggling, and that becomes a priority. We also have students who are struggling with mental health. And because they are within a home that struggles with mental health issues, they are also struggling with how to navigate all of the things that they have to contend with on a daily basis or a weekly basis. And it's hard for them to focus on getting to first hour when they're just trying to make it through. In some cases, struggles in the home. You have depression, you have anxiety, you have a lot of things. And so, just understanding some of those barriers, because, this conversation is about chronic absenteeism. It's a major difference between that and just students not attending school. So we have an attendance issue of students like, you should go to school. You've missed a couple of days. And then we have the chronic absenteeism where when they've missed 10, 15, 20, 30 days, you know, they have prioritized other things, and or they're struggling with something that's deeper than just, oh my gosh, I missed today. So just understanding, all of the layers of what's happening and having sympathy, empathy, and a plan to help our families through some of those things is really important.
Thank you so much, Dr. Johnson. I am reminded as you all speak, how complex this issue is and how real it is for so many of our students in their homes who may be the only one there who can tend to that person who has cancer. So what do we do for that student? There's a lot of big issues and it will take our communities, not just the school personnel, but our communities to help address some of these issues so that we can have those students and they can, with a clear mind, come to school and be present. Would there be anything else that anyone would like to add to this piece of our conversation today? This is a weighty subject. I really thank you so much for your wonderful thoughts, but I'm just kind of sitting here taking it in and just being reminded of how important the work is that each and every one of you is doing. So thank you. Let's talk about another little piece here. That is, in the past, our educational system has relied on criminalization to improve school attendance. So let's talk a little bit about what we think are the harms and the pitfalls of using courts and prosecution.
Sure. Let me jump in on that one because that's been the focus of the research that I've done. So, I think that to some extent, schools are in a tough spot. We have a compulsory education law. Students between the ages of 5 and 16 must attend school. 16 to 18 is a little bit more complicated. And the law says, in Title 70, a statute, you can point to it that says that if a student has 10 or more unexcused absences over the course of a semester, then schools are required to submit a report to the district attorney. What has been really interesting and fascinating and sometimes incredibly confusing is that the way that schools interpret that requirement and the way that different district attorneys interpret that requirement and the way that different city prosecutors interpret that requirement can really be all over the map. I would say in general, I can't say that I've spoken to a single person, whether on the school side or on the law enforcement side, juvenile justice or city prosecutor or district attorney, who has said that they go to work every day hoping to file charges against 12-year-olds or their parents. But we know that it happens. Between 2012 and 2020, there were 10,000 misdemeanor charges for truancy filed against people in Oklahoma, and this was just in 13 of the largest counties that we were able to collect data from. So I think we do end up situations where at a certain point, whether it's after 8 absences or 10 absences or 20, where schools do notify their SROs, police officers, district attorneys, and charges can be filed. And I think it's very much an open question as to whether that is ever in the interests of the students involved or of the community. There is a lot of research that says that as soon as a child is involved in the juvenile justice system, that they end up with worse outcomes, that they're going to have worse school performance, less of a chance to graduate, and many studies have shown that their attendance doesn't improve either. So it is a dilemma for schools. The law says you have to go to school. If you don't go to school, then there will be consequences, but it's not clear that the consequences are either are especially effective or serving really anybody's best interest. So I will leave it to that and would really love to hear the perspective of those on the law enforcement side and on the on the education side.
So I definitely would like to jump in there on that.
Please.
So I agree with what you're saying, but I'll start by saying it's unfortunate that any kid would ever, or parent would ever find themselves in front of a court or prosecution. But the fact of the matter is it works. It has been working. The pitfall I see, however, is that it doesn't really allow, or it hasn't allowed for schools or administrators, and let's be honest, legislators, to be creative and come up with motivators that also work. I see the courts and prosecution as an incredible asset, as long as they're a supplement to the plan and not the only plan. I don't like being called on when nothing else has been done. And they say, well, if you miss, we're just going to call the SRO on you. Well, how about figuring out from your end why they're missing? But of course, I have a job to do. But I agree that it does work. I have been to the door with students. We've given them 6, 7, 8 chances of me showing up there. And on number 8, man, I got to write you on this. They go to court. The judge tells them, you got to show up to school until after Christmas. And if you do, I'll drop this. And they show up. But you're right. In some instances, they go right back to it now that the judge isn't holding over them. So I've seen it work. I've seen it, it's just a piece of paper to them. Their parents pay it and go on. We've been to the door with parents and they have a 4th grader and a 3rd grader, and the kids just decided they didn't want to go. And so the parents would just rather pay the fine than to try to force their kids to actually go to school. And it comes down to who prioritizes education.
If I could jump in as well, from the legal standpoint, coming from what we do, essentially getting referrals from schools that have made those efforts and want to, essentially they're sending it to us to go to court. So our program can bring a unique perspective as opposed to the county district courts, in that we can provide that advocacy process prior to court involvement. Our local district courts sometimes don't have the staff to do that. And so I've seen that bringing those cases immediately into court has not been as successful as trying to meet with some of these families, whether it's school staff, law enforcement, legal staff. If we have blindly entered some of these families into court in hopes that the judge can, essentially knock some sense into the kids, probably most of the time it'll work, but you really need to find that root cause, like we were talking about before. And so working with these families has been key. And I think that's something that we have found has brought great success. Some of the schools on our end, as a tribal entity, we have a unique issue that schools will have to kind of differentiate the native students and non-native students. And so while we provide an advocacy service for our First American students, the students in the schools in our area that are not First American don't get the benefit of having this advocacy service. Well, some of the local schools that we've partnered with have seen the success of our program, and the school staff themselves have started to implement this this process that they would go through prior to involving the local law enforcement and local DAs as far as sending the truancy case on. Early intervention is really key for what we have found. You know, there's all these predetermined numbers in black and white. You've reached 10, 15, 20 absences, whatever it may have been. But the earlier we've been able to meet with these families, even if it's, you know, 5 absences, if we're able to meet with them and whether it's mending that communication line, you know, figuring out if there's an issue with transportation, whatever the root cause is, if we're able to address that early, you know, it's easy to clear up. If you have a student that has 30 absences, they're not going to be very motivated to change that semester because they've been gone for a third of the semester and they've gotten away with it. And so we found that getting it kind of nipped early is the easiest way to do it, and working with that family from that starting point. That way, if it builds on, obviously we can get to the point of getting into court, but starting out as an advocacy process has been beneficial.
Yeah, Kyle, I'm happy to hear that, and I completely understand the stance that Officer Hill has communicated regarding just a need to ensure that families understand the importance, and you give chances and you're trying to work with them, and it becomes hard and difficult because unfortunately the child is the one who's hurting in the end when they're not in school. We have taken the stance in Tulsa Public Schools that whereas we will communicate to families the importance of their child being at school every day, as well as the effects of what happens when they're not at school, how they compare to their peers who are in school on a daily basis, as far as how they're not achieving academically, how it sets them up on a trajectory to potentially be a dropout when they're missing so much school from elementary, because it actually starts as a pattern from elementary on. We know that our families respond well when there are people who reach out to them with the accountability piece, but most importantly with the support of what can we do to get your child in school. So we in Tulsa Public Schools realized that we needed to have some structures in place for how to do this and do this successfully. One, we, hired a director of family attendance and supports in Stephanie Gregory, who is on the call listening in, as well as we have 2 attendance recovery coordinators, and these gentlemen are community advocates. They are people that are known in the community as being individuals who care for young people and who can actually help move the needle. They come with their own specialized background in community work. And so what we found is that families are responding really well to those levels of reach out. And also I'll just say that, we've had a lot of conversation about what happens when families are just not sending students to school, and is this a matter that should be reported? Well, we have to report it anyway in our district. So we report that information to the courts. But on the other hand of that, what is going to be the strategy that's going to give families to feel the need in their child instead of feeling like they've gotten in trouble or forced? So how do we win them over with the benefit of their child going to school every day? And so that's been our angle. We've seen success. We had this same time last year about a 48% chronic absenteeism rate. We're sitting at about a 44% right now. It's still too high, and we have a ways to go, but we have some plans in place. We've launched an Attend to Win campaign with the mayor and the city of Tulsa, as well as with partners, as I've stated earlier. We're trying to make this a citywide, statewide issue that we have to, have all hands on deck and address. So those are some of the things that we have done. We're planning to do what's called a 10 to win friends, where there'll be someone in each of our schools, maybe one or two people, that's all that they do is, in addition to their other work, but they call our families and reach out and give them options and supports on a daily basis. So we're trying to do some things that can really show families how much we care, while also reminding them of the effects of their child not being there.
Thank you, Dr. Johnson. Oh, man, as I listen to all of the panelists and speak from their area of expertise on this very critical subject, I am reminded that it is the care of community, and how do we build a community that cares beyond our school walls. And our society has gotten pretty fragmented, and so this only adds to the challenge in terms of how do we get all resources pointing in the same direction, and people truly believing that you care about what's happening in that home and that you are there to help. And so I thank you all for your perspective on this so much. Last part to this particular question is, as communities, what can we do to interrupt or prevent? You hear that term, school to prison pipeline. So either what does that mean to you? How realistic is it in terms of your thinking? How do we interrupt it? And I see Officer Hill just over there with a smile on his face going, I got this one, Deb. So I'm going to turn it to you, Officer Hill, for you to speak to us on this particular issue.
Well, I just wanted to get my piece out as an SRO before Aubrey jumped in. And this is just because I'm going to speak from my role as an SRO. And I have definitely heard this term, school to prison pipeline. I'm going to reframe that as a school to justice pipeline, just from the role of an SRO. I'm only going off of that because of some of the research done by like the Root, the ACLU, Vox, you name it. They've all done it. And they pretty much frame this picture of the increase of police in schools throughout the years has increased more kids going to prison after school because of their exposure to law enforcement. That's kind of the way a lot of these things are framed if you just go on YouTube and just start looking at videos about this. Going through NASRO, which is the National Association of School Resource Officers, going through their training, we've seen that the increase in SROs actually cuts that down. We have a very particular job that we do that decreases kids from going down that road. We see it more of a home to prison pipeline, which is kind of those root causes that we were talking about earlier. Not necessarily a school. Of talking to people who are incarcerated, the times I have, not one of them have ever blamed a teacher or an SRO or anything like that. They've definitely come from a background that has led them down that road. I can honestly say that just in my experience, I haven't really ever experienced a situation where I'm eager to put someone into the justice system. My job is primarily to come alongside the school and collaboratively figure out something that works for the student rather than putting them straight into the justice system.
A good perspective. Aubrey, you want to add on to what he's saying there from your side?
I want to know how he knew I was like chomping at the bit, right? Don't have enough time for me to get on my soapbox about this, but I will try and be brief. But when I think about school to prison pipeline and how do we, I think the question is like, how do we interrupt it or prevent it? The word that comes to mind is voice. So the reason I say that is because I think it is incredibly important that we remember the age of the students that we are working with. I think it's incredibly important that we remember that often these students that we're talking about in terms of chronic absenteeism, we know data says that they it's the most effective student groups are our youngest and our oldest, right? So our pre-K, our kinder, our first grade babies, and then our juniors and seniors. And so when I think about voice, I think about how do we help school to be a place where our youngest learners are exploring that sense of belonging, exploring what it means to have voice and have agency, and it to be a safe place to make mistakes, learn from those mistakes. But all of that then really grounds them in that school, that they belong at school, and that school for me, school is more than you're a child, I'm older than you sit in a seat, I have gone to school longer than you, I know the things, you're an empty bucket, I'm just going to fill you with the things. School is so much more than that. And when I think about how can we interrupt it, I think about how do we help teachers and children walk in partnership alongside with families to create this kind of coexistence where we are supporting the learning of children while also grounding them in that school is their school. This is not Miss Flower's classroom and you just happen to coexist in it, right? But this is our classroom, and they buy in and dig in there, which then also expands to their families, and their families feel that. And then we continue that as they grow older, because, and that would be what I would think would be incredibly beneficial to interrupt that pipeline. Because if we are not actively creating and building and encouraging strong citizens in our youngest children, then we're not preparing them to use that voice when they are 18 and they're voting, when they are 25 and maybe deciding to get married, right? Like there are so many things that they need that space to learn to cultivate that voice and how to make good choices, that that needs to be grown as well. And so, yeah, I try to keep it succinct. Sorry, y'all. That's not easy. I mean, doing what I've just said is not easy, right? It challenges every aspect of an education system, and it would be easier if in Miss Flower's classroom, the children came into the room, they sat down, they read from this, they were silent. Now I can check off the box that I have taught them, right? That would be easier, but that doesn't mean that it's right, and it doesn't mean that it would lead us to better outcomes for our children.
Thank you, Aubrey. Thank you so much. I hear your heart. I hear your heart. Anyone else want to speak to this issue?
Actually, Debbie, given that we have only 12 minutes left, maybe we can get quickly to the last question and then see about questions from the audience.
All right. Just hard to move on, isn't it? So our last question, let's talk about some success stories. We know it's a complicated matter, but that doesn't mean we can't be successful in it. So let's focus on what innovations have made the most difference to school attendance. So Kyle, you want to give us a couple that you think have made the most difference, and then we'll move to Dr. Johnson to give us 2 or 3 that she thinks have been the most successful for her. So Kyle, thank you.
Sure, I'll try to be as brief as possible to give room for questions, and then Dr. Johnson to fill in. And like I've said before, I think that the best thing that we can do to help these families is treat them all as human. Have that hands-on approach and meet with each family personally to figure out what they're struggling with that is leading to their absenteeism. And so, I think being able to meet with the families and figure out that root cause, again, it's a key word, that is causing that absenteeism is key. Treating them as, a family member, treating them as a regular person, that maybe they don't get treated like that at work and they haven't been treated like that at their school in the past. Having that human approach has been key. And I think that's probably the biggest thing that I have seen that the schools can do, and the legal side can do to kind of mend the relationship.
Thank you, Kyle. Dr. Johnson?
Yeah, I'm in complete agreement with Kyle. I'll just say that we're excited that the community is embracing this work because it's going to take all of us. I heard Miss Flowers earlier today talk about the students who are getting jobs during the day and, just reaching out to employers and saying, please still give them jobs and internships, but let's make sure that it's not affecting their actual academic day. And just, again, as I mentioned earlier, the mayor, going public with us and saying attend to win matters, and we've got to get our young people in school. So we're really excited about that. Our director that I mentioned earlier, Stephanie Gregory, had the opportunity to go to the Washington, D.C. and actually have conversations on a national level and learn from a national landscape what's happening across various school districts and across the country with this work, and just learning and listening and hearing from Secretary Cardona around, this is an issue across all of the United States, and we've got to do something about it collectively. So I know funds are coming along, and they're looking at grants for districts to be able to apply to in order to put more efforts into this work. So all of those things are positive. And I'll also say that, as our schools are, realizing their role, it's allowed us to ensure that we have attendance teams set up where team members inside of our schools are meeting on a regular basis to talk about the data, talk about the students, and then reach out to families. And so all of these efforts are allowing us to really embrace it and then see the data change. And so we're looking so forward to our future work. We have some partners that are collaborating with us to understand our McKinney-Vento homeless population. So we're appreciative of Impact Tulsa for the research and the data that they have gathered with our data team in Tulsa Public Schools to really zero in on, okay, those a percentage of our chronically absent students are the students who are struggling with, finding a home. And so how can we as a district give them support, provision, give them grace, give them ways to do their work on, online and be able to count them as present. So we're just trying to figure out various ways, but I'm really excited about the momentum.
Sounds like big things are happening for Tulsa Public Schools. That's wonderful. And to think about what we can learn at the national level as there's that emphasis there. So those are all good things. Now we will move toward, I thank you so much for all of your contributions this evening, but we will move at this point to any questions that may have come through. And Colleen, I'm going to turn this to you because you're the one who's been monitoring those. So let's move into questions from our audience.
Hi, everybody. I had 3 questions that I left in the chat that I'd love to pose to the group, and anybody can jump in. So we had a question from John that basically indicates he did some research showing that heart disease, cancer, and diabetes in a family or major illnesses like that can highly impact chronic absenteeism. Does anyone on the panel have any thoughts or things they want to reflect about that?
I'll just jump in and say that just as a former principal in both, elementary, middle, and high school, I have had families to come and explain that because of a family member who is struggling with illness, serious illness, it's causing the student to not only struggle with, what's happening with that family member, but being a caretaker and just giving a lot of supports. And so that's truly a real thing. I know that, we have many of our students who are stepping in and helping other family members and stepping in the stead. And it does result sometimes in those students missing quite a bit of school in order to prioritize family and family need.
And let me just say, John, thank you for the piece that you wrote just in the past couple of days in the Oklahoma Voice, looking at chronic absenteeism, and appreciate you sharing the link to the research you did. I will definitely check that out too.
Thank you, guys. I did just saw, I saw that Kenitra was talking about the prevalence of mental health, and it seems like, especially since COVID, mental health in schools has been a huge, huge issue, and not just in schools, but in jails and in our court system. It's been a huge issue. And so I'd love to hear y'all's reflections on the mental health side of this, if you have a few minutes.
I'll speak up on this one. So I know that, it kind of goes with John's point as well. And, we've had families that have had issues with disease, death in families. And not only is that an immediate issue because the student is missing some of those days that they're needing for bereavement and whatever it may be, but it leads to mental health issues that they're dealing with the loss of a family member or prolonged sickness. And so, I think that the more that we go on in this day and age, mental health is a bigger and bigger issue for everybody, but youth and teens in general, I think that we're still figuring out how to treat that and how to understand what some of the youth in our community go through. And it's a huge issue for absenteeism. If a student is going through depression or severe anxiety, they're going to have a fundamental issue with going to school if they're not feeling welcomed by their peers, if they're not motivated to be in school. Those are all things that somebody's mental health can affect, that is not going to be prevalent at a face value, and you truly have to understand where they're coming from and some of the issues that they're dealing with to affect that.
Thank you for that one.
I would also add, if it's okay, I know Kenitra also, I believe she asked around suspensions as well. And so like I would connect those a bit when we talk about mental health and yes, Kyle, like the prevalence of our mental health concerns with our students and families is increasing. And we are seeing it as part of the issues around chronic absenteeism, but it is also playing a role in suspensions because I'll tell you firsthand, I post-COVID was seeing challenges with children at ages I had not ever seen before. The challenges are affecting our youngest kiddos, and things like anxiety and depression are manifesting themselves in ways that then result in out of school time in terms of suspension. So and I can carry over into the sense of belonging. Do you want me to do that, Colleen? I'm just so the question
I'm going, girl.
was Kenitra around how does suspensions affect a child's sense of belonging? And that is and I'm gonna answer with my school leader hat on, with my principal hat on. It's a really, really tricky thing. It does affect their sense of belonging. There's no way that it can't, right? If school is this place that is safe and that is caring and where you own it, right? You have bought into it. It needs to be a place that is safe to make mistakes. And so all of that builds towards your sense of belonging, but then something happens, you make a decision that is really, really harsh and harmful or harmful to someone else that does require an upper level of discipline and require some kind of suspension. Then how does that feel? There's this like betrayal, I would imagine, that child is feeling because school was supposed to be a safe place to make mistakes. However, we also have to keep the building safe and 500 other students safe or 3,000 other students safe. So that's a tricky balance to hold. And the only answer I can say there is that as long as sense of belonging and empathy are holding core at the adult making the decision, then I think suspending a child is never easy for anyone. And so I think that as long as they're holding that at their core, they know the consequences of suspending a child and how that could affect their sense of belonging.
Well, we have one more comment in the chat, and I know we're really close to getting at time, but it's about the lack of school counselors and school social workers and the lack of parity. I know there's we have a huge discrepancy between the ratios of students for school counselors and, does anybody want to talk about that as quickly as possible before we wrap up?
I think I can jump in there and just say that, you know, absolutely, we struggle with student to counselor ratio. I think we're right now at, for every student, for every 400 students, 350 plus, we have a counselor. And so it's really hard in that sense. And then mental health agencies, we do have partnerships with mental health agencies, and we do provide supports for students who need those levels of intervention and support, but it's just of course not enough. In Oklahoma, as you know, we are ranked 4th in female incarceration. We have a high rate of adverse childhood experiences, when in comparison to the national average. So there's a lot of factors that come into play that affect how our students are showing up on a daily basis. And so just having enough people to actually support some of those needs definitely becomes a struggle. But I will say that, per what was stated a little earlier by Aubrey, whenever you do create an environment where students do feel like they're loved and appreciated, and you want them there, you need them there, and you need their families to be on board, then it reduces the amount of acute need that we see, because students are coming into a structured, supportive, and caring environment. So then it becomes a very small percentage of students that you need to really target a lot of tier 3 intervention for when those environments are established. And so I'll just say that absolutely it's an issue. But I applaud everything I'm hearing on this call from all of the panelists, because I think we can all learn from each other. We can learn how to build a network where we are supporting, our young people, because we know that when they are in school, they're thriving and get connected to opportunities and resources and having strong instructional experiences, then they're set up for a tremendous amount of success. And so that's our role. We're in it to win it with that, and we're going to continue to do this work. So.
How could we have a better ending than that? So we thank all of you panelists so much, and our participants for showing up. And we will continue these conversations, I'm sure, throughout the year in a variety of different ways as we come out as Oklahoma Appleseed to your communities and hear what you have to say about your schools, and as we offer different opportunities for us all to learn from one another. So I thank each and every one of you, and I wish everyone a very good evening. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.